I talked to him about it. I asked him questions about it. I heard his side of the story, which no one has ever heard.
At 62, Melissa Gilbert finally decided to talk about a truth that had followed her for most of her life. For decades, America remembered her as Laura Ingalls, the bright-eyed prairie girl from Little House on the Prairie, the child Michael Landon affectionately called Half Pint. Viewers saw warmth, family, courage, and innocence. They did not see everything happening behind that image. Gilbert had been adopted almost immediately after birth, raised in a Hollywood family, pushed into acting while still a child, and given a painful explanation for her father's death that was not the truth. Years later, discovering what had really happened forced her to revisit the childhood everyone thought they understood. Melissa was born in Los Angeles on May 8, 1964, and her story was connected to show business from the beginning. She was placed for adoption immediately after birth and adopted the following day by actor Paul Gilbert and actress and dancer Barbara Crane. Her family already carried Hollywood connections. Her maternal grandfather was Harry Crane, creator of The Honeymooners, so entertainment was not a distant world surrounding her childhood. It was part of the family itself. Before Melissa was old enough to understand what fame meant, cameras were already becoming part of her life. She appeared in commercials as a young child, including a well-known Alpo advertisement with Lauren Green. But the hardest secret was waiting at home. Melissa grew up believing that her adoptive father had died from a stroke. That explanation remained with her for years. Then she learned the truth. Paul Gilbert had died by suicide. The revelation was devastating. She later described months when she could barely eat or sleep normally, because the loss returned with a completely different meaning. This was not simply grief over a parent. It was grief complicated by the discovery that an important part of her own family history had been hidden from her. By then, her parents had already divorced when she was 6, and her mother had remarried. Her childhood therefore carried adoption, divorce, family changes, secrecy, and public attention all at once. Then came the role that changed everything. In late 1973, Melissa auditioned for Little House on the Prairie. Hundreds of girls were considered for Laura Ingalls, but 9-year-old Melissa won the part. She filmed the pilot, which aired in March 1974, and the series began that September. Michael Landon, already famous from Bonanza, personally approved her casting. On set, he became a mentor and an important father figure. From 1974 through 1983, Melissa appeared in nearly every episode, growing from a child into a teenager while millions watched. Her schedule was intense. Filming occupied most weekdays, while California's child performer rules limited school time. She was living an unusually adult working life before most children her age had even imagined a career. Landon's nickname for her, Half Pint, became inseparable from her public identity. People expected the actress to behave like the character everywhere she went. Gilbert later explained that playing Laura could feel like an escape from real life, yet the same role became a cage. The world had created a perfect version of her, and she had to grow up while carrying it. By the time Little House ended, she was 18 and already a recognizable television star. She had received major attention, including a Golden Globe nomination, but fame had not answered the question she was beginning to ask. Who was Melissa when she was not Laura? The answer became harder to find during the 1980s. Gilbert entered a more adult Hollywood world, dated Rob Lowe, spent time around the Brat Pack scene, and was photographed around musicians such as Billy Idol. She deliberately chose projects that could challenge the old image. At 15, she had already taken on Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker on a New York stage. Later, she accepted darker television roles, including a story about American church women murdered in El Salvador and a crime drama involving a mafia wife. She was fighting to convince an industry that had made her famous as a child that she could become something else. The battle continued into the 1990s. Gilbert starred in Stand By Your Man from 1992 to 1993, then played attorney Kate Delroy in Sweet Justice from 1994 to 1995. Neither series lasted beyond one season. Opportunities existed, but the shadow of Laura remained stronger. Her 2009 memoir, Prairie Tale, finally gave her a place to explain what the public could not see. She wrote about addiction, failed relationships, cosmetic procedures she regretted, and insecurity in a culture obsessed with beauty. She admitted that even after decades of success, she could feel empty. Her struggles with alcohol developed later in life, not during the Little House years. After her grandfather died, she began drinking to sleep. Over time, The habit became severe, sometimes reaching 2 bottles of wine a night, and she also described abusing prescription medication. A humiliating episode, when she passed out drunk in her dog's bed while entertaining a friend, became a turning point. Therapy and Alcoholics Anonymous helped her move toward sobriety, and around 2004 she reached that milestone. Gilbert was no longer simply trying to escape Laura. She was trying to rescue Melissa from patterns that had followed her long after the cameras stopped rolling. Her public life also moved into leadership. In 2001, Gilbert was elected president of the Screen Actors Guild after a difficult race against Valerie Harper. She was re-elected in 2003 and served until 2005. She had moved from being managed by adults on a television set to representing working performers in a powerful union. She had to negotiate, argue, organize, and make decisions while facing criticism from people who remembered her as a little girl. It was another step away from the image of Half Pint and toward the woman she was becoming. Her relationship with beauty became another major chapter. Soon after turning 18, Gilbert underwent a rhinoplasty. She later had breast implants and eventually used fillers, Botox, and other cosmetic treatments. For years, she felt pressure to remain youthful and camera-ready. She has described the unspoken expectation that actresses stay extremely thin and maintain an appearance that could survive Hollywood lighting. Eventually, the effort became exhausting. She realized she was not simply changing her appearance. She was trying to negotiate with a culture that treated aging as a professional failure. Around 2013, Gilbert made a dramatic decision. She left Los Angeles and later described the move as necessary if she wanted to age honestly. After marrying Timothy Busfield, she settled first in Michigan and eventually embraced a quieter life in upstate New York. She stopped Botox and fillers, allowed her hair to turn gray, and began focusing on gardening, cooking, nature, and home. Gilbert started treating wrinkles, scars, and gray hair as evidence of a life lived rather than flaws that needed correction. She rejected the phrase anti-aging, arguing that aging should not be treated as something women must defeat. Her marriages also reflected a long search for stability. In 1988, at 23, she married Bo Brinkman after ending her highly publicized engagement to Rob Lowe. Their son Dakota was born in 1989. The relationship later became marked by infidelity, substance abuse, and destructive arguments before the couple divorced in 1994. Gilbert's second marriage, to Bruce Boxleitner, began in 1995. Their son Michael was born that year, and he was named partly in honor of Michael Landon. Yet Gilbert later acknowledged that she was still chasing emotional security and using alcohol to cope. She and Boxleitner separated in 2010 and finalized their divorce in 2011. Then, in 2012, something different happened. Gilbert met Timothy Busfield at a Los Angeles bar. He was having pizza at the counter, and their conversation developed without the drama she had known before. Both had children, previous marriages, and long careers behind them. Busfield proposed later that year, and on April 24, 2013, they married at a private ceremony at San Isidro Ranch in Santa Barbara. Gilbert wore red instead of white. After everything she had survived, this was another beginning. Their life together became a quieter second act. They moved away from Los Angeles, restored a rural property, and shared an interest in simple living. Gilbert's public work increasingly reflected that change. She wrote about gardens, cooking, home, aging, and the value of stepping outside Hollywood's expectations. For fans, the marriage represented a hopeful ending to a difficult story. After 2 divorces, addiction, insecurity, and years of public pressure, Gilbert seemed to have found the stability she had spent decades searching for. But in 2026, that peaceful image was shattered by allegations against Busfield, turning Gilbert's late-life story in a direction no one could have predicted. The allegations against Timothy Busfield changed the meaning of everything that had come before. In January 2026, he was arrested in New Mexico after twin boys connected to the cleaning lady accused him of sexual abuse. A grand jury later indicted him on criminal sexual contact charges involving a minor. Earlier claims also resurfaced. Busfield pleaded not guilty and denied the accusations, describing them as lies. The case remained unresolved, with a trial tentatively scheduled for 2027. Yet for Melissa Gilbert, the emotional impact was immediate. The quiet life she had built with Busfield suddenly became a public crisis. When Gilbert spoke about the case on Good Morning America in 2026, She made her position unmistakable. She said Busfield was the last person in the world who would hurt a child and said she trusted him with her children's lives. She described the arrest as the moment their entire life changed. Finances, friendships, plans, and professional opportunities seemed to disappear almost overnight. She believed Busfield's career had effectively been cancelled, and she believed that even an exoneration might not erase the label created by the accusations. Her defense immediately divided viewers. Some people interpreted it as loyalty to a husband facing a terrifying legal battle. Others questioned how anyone could be so certain while the case was still unfolding. She spoke as a wife who believed her husband was innocent and who was grieving the future she thought they were building. Her story has always involved the collision between private experience and public perception. As a child, millions of people believed they knew who she was because they knew Laura Ingalls. As an adult, she learned that public opinion could create an identity just as quickly, and sometimes just as unfairly, as Hollywood had created one for her. Even before the legal crisis, Gilbert had been confronting another challenge: physical pain. In 2012, she joined Dancing with the Stars and was paired with Maxim Shmerkovsky. During a performance, she fell and hit her head but finished the routine before being taken away by ambulance. Doctors diagnosed a concussion and whiplash. She returned to competition and eventually finished fifth. The injury was only one chapter in a much longer struggle with her spine. She had suffered a serious back injury years earlier and underwent spinal fusion surgery in 2010. The pain did not simply disappear. It continued through the following decade, bringing nerve symptoms, headaches, numbness, and disrupted sleep. By 2020, the problems had become serious enough for another major operation. Gilbert underwent surgery to remove old hardware and repair deteriorating discs in her neck. The procedure was part of an effort to stop progressive nerve damage after years of pain. The body keeps its own record. It remembers falls, injuries, surgeries, stress, and years of trying to appear stronger than you feel. Gilbert's public image had once been built around a young girl surviving every hardship with courage. Now she was learning that real courage could also mean admitting when something hurt. Then came another health scare. In 2023, while staying at her Catskills cabin, Gilbert noticed what seemed to be an ordinary insect bite on her arm. Within a day, the area became dramatically swollen and developed red streaks. She developed a fever and went to the emergency room, where doctors diagnosed cellulitis and an abscess. She received intravenous antibiotics and treatment before the infection could become more dangerous. It reminded her that serious problems do not always announce themselves with dramatic symptoms. Sometimes the warning starts as something that looks almost harmless. Another discovery gave Gilbert an explanation for a problem she had carried since childhood. In 2024, she spoke publicly about misophonia, a condition involving unusually intense reactions to specific sounds. She remembered experiencing extreme distress on the Little House set when people chewed gum, tapped their fingernails, or made other sounds around her. Her body reacted before she understood why. She could become overwhelmed, angry, embarrassed, or desperate to escape. For years, she interpreted those reactions as evidence that something was wrong with her personality. Learning that the experience had a name changed that. It gave her a framework for understanding herself instead of blaming herself. Gilbert eventually connected with Duke University's Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation. She underwent 16 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy and learned to recognize physical warning signs before the reaction became overwhelming. She later began speaking publicly about the condition, hoping greater awareness would encourage research and help other people who had spent years believing they were simply difficult or unstable. That same philosophy shaped her attitude toward aging. After leaving Los Angeles, Gilbert gradually stopped trying to maintain the appearance Hollywood had demanded from her. She stopped coloring her hair and allowed it to become naturally gray. She moved away from fillers and Botox. She began speaking openly about wrinkles, menopause, changing bodies, and the fear women are taught to feel about getting older. Gilbert wanted the opposite message. She wanted women to understand that every line represented something they had survived, experienced, learned, or loved. In 2022, she launched Modern Prairie, a lifestyle brand and online community aimed at women over 50. Instead of chasing the entertainment industry's youth obsession, she was building a space around aging, creativity, home, friendship, gardening, cooking, and reinvention. She appeared with little or no makeup, talked about menopause and body changes, and rejected the idea that older women should disappear from public life. Turning 60 in 2024 became another milestone. Rather than apologizing for her age, Gilbert celebrated the scars, lines, opinions, and experiences that came with it. Her work also evolved. She continued acting, but she became more interested in roles that reflected the age she actually was. A later stage production, Still, allowed her to portray a woman in her mid-60s confronting a romance from decades earlier. She no longer wanted to pretend she was younger to remain visible. She wanted stories about women who had already lived complicated lives and were still capable of desire, humor, conflict, growth, and love. That transformation is especially striking when compared with the girl America first met. At 9, Gilbert was expected to embody innocence. At 18, she was expected to remain recognizable as the same child. In her 20s and 30s, she struggled to prove she could be something else. In middle age, she confronted addiction, relationships, cosmetic pressure, leadership, pain, and financial difficulty. In her 50s and 60s, she began stripping away the parts of herself that had been built for other people's approval. Her relationship with Michael Landon remained an important thread throughout that journey. He had helped shape her childhood and career, and she later named her son Michael in his honor. Landon died of pancreatic cancer in 1991 at 54, leaving behind a legacy deeply connected to Gilbert's formative years. In 2025, she worked with the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network in his memory. It was another example of Gilbert turning personal history into public purpose. The man who had once called her Half Pint was no longer simply a television memory. His influence remained part of the woman she became. And perhaps that is the most revealing part of Melissa Gilbert's story. The biggest change did not happen when she left Little House on the Prairie. It did not happen when she became a union president, wrote a memoir, married again, or moved away from Los Angeles. It happened when she stopped believing that the public version of her life had to be the real one. She had spent decades being told what she looked like, what she should weigh, how young she should appear, how Laura should behave, and even what her family history was supposed to mean. Eventually, she began choosing the answers for herself. At 62, Gilbert's life is not a neat Hollywood fairy tale. It contains adoption, grief, childhood fame, hidden family pain, addiction, recovery, failed marriages, physical suffering, aging, reinvention, and a deeply controversial legal crisis surrounding the man she married. Some chapters are inspiring. Others are uncomfortable. Some remain unresolved. But that complexity is exactly what makes her story different from the perfect image audiences once saw on television. Melissa Gilbert was never simply Half Pint. She was a child actor who grew up too quickly, a woman who made serious mistakes, a survivor who kept rebuilding, and an older actress who decided that growing older was not something to hide. Her greatest rebellion may not have been leaving Hollywood or going gray. It may have been refusing to let other people decide what her life was supposed to look like. The Prairie girl grew up. What remained was a woman learning, sometimes painfully, how to live without a script. And after everything she has endured, perhaps that is the truth she was searching for all along. Not a perfect life, but an authentic one. Her story remains deeply unfinished, and that may be the most honest ending for someone living inside expectations today.